Now, before we go into the three ways, we kind of need to cover a little bit of a background of the evolving role of HR. Some of the offbeat, maybe quirky, satirical, traditional HR functions or descriptions of them, perceptions of them, maybe come across on social, and these aren't necessarily the accurate ones, but maybe the funny or the perceptions that some people have. One being talent acquisition, one of the roles that is a traditional HR function, also known as the great hunt for unicorns. If you know how to hunt a unicorn, then you are in the right place in talent acquisition. Maybe it's around onboarding, the great initiation ceremony and helping people to drink the Kool-Aid of your organization. Maybe the function in HR that people are known for, or the perception when it comes to performance reviews, annual judgment day. Is that correct? Maybe it's not. Hopefully not. Employee relations. Is HR known as the Office Gossip Mediation Council, solving disputes over stolen lunch, thermostat settings, and passive-aggressive email chains with the finesse of a diplomat, judge, jury, and executioner. Is that how HR feel? Or maybe that's the perception in years gone by. Compliance and policy enforcement, the rule book reverence society, ensuring people follow the sacred rule book of the company. Maybe when it comes to employee engagement, some of the functions might be around the corporate morale circus, organising pizza-based team building activities and motivational speeches to inspire, but they just mostly entertain. Maybe when it comes to succession planning, the function is the crystal ball gazing. You've got the secret sauce that nobody else has, and you've just got to try and figure that all out. And then a little bit into where we're heading today, workforce data. Maybe it's the data and cash dilemma that the function's known for, collecting and interpreting spreadsheets. Who loves a good spreadsheet of employee data? Maybe you've been asked to uncover trends that might explain why people are unhappy and justifying every cent that is spent through the HR function. So while these are more on the satirical side of titles and descriptions and functions of HR and for years gone by, they do speak to some of the spoken and unspoken perceptions of HR in a traditional sense. Two key things is the processes and being rule keepers. Not necessarily being the fun police and making sure everyone's doing the right thing. Now, hopefully there was nothing too painful in those satirical descriptions and we can have a little laugh at ourselves. But we kind of need to cover a little bit of background because we want to be a strategic coach, and that's the topic of today's session. So, Rudy, are we still there? Are they fair, accurate in the past descriptions? How do you think HR is seen today?
Nathan, I think that was actually pretty funny, if I'm honest. I didn't know you were going to actually present some of this stuff, but I did have a little chuckle to myself because, as you said, if you're on Instagram and Facebook, you'd get these little snippets of what people think, HR's job is and what they actually do and so forth. So, look, I do think they're a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of stuff, but I do actually feel for HR. HR does an amazing job, and I think, the people on this call, would be well aware of the workload HR typically does and the issues they typically have to face. And to be honest with you, I think some of these comments really isn't HR's fault. And I do suspect, however, though, there is a bit of truth to some of these comments. But as I said, I don't think it's necessarily HR's fault. As a matter of fact, I think the origin and the continuous propagation of some of these comments are mainly due to management and companies' views of HR, the expectation that they have or had on HR over time, specifically the view that employees or people in the organization are unpredictable and therefore need to be controlled and need to be policed, making HR therefore the corporate police, as you say. So, and this is very much that traditional view of HR, as you said, the rule keepers, the enforcer, the police, and this approach to HR or this view of HR, if I can take a bit of a historical sidestep here, typically stems back from really the Industrial Revolution era with the growth of machines in factories. Machines are, typically predictable and reliable and even more so over time, built to precision. And where there's a lot of errors, incidents, accidents, it's normally due to human variability, human variance that brings error into the production line, most of the time. And it is that human variability that management and companies want to control and to basically avoid losses, right? So that's that traditional focus, hence why HR has traditionally been focused on rules as such. I mean, even if you just look at safety critical industries like mining, aviation, construction, you name it, most incidents and accidents are actually due to human failure, human error, that variability as such.
Yeah.
But here's the thing though, not all human variability is bad. Not all of this variability needs to be that tightly controlled. Some variability is actually very good. It brings diversity of thought, different approaches to problem solving, to change management, innovation. This type of variability, when harnessed right, can make an individual, a team, a company a lot more productive, even provide the company with that competitive advantage to their competitors, right? Because if you're able to harness that variability in the right way consistently over time to get better performance, you're going to outperform your competitors. And this is where variability also drives culture and ways of work, essentially. And when focused around the same vision and purpose, this variability can be very powerful. And as I said, not easily copied by competitors. And I think this is what a lot of the more modern leaders, management styles, companies are seeing and trying to harness, right? I think, back in the day, competitive advantage was really seen in the physical assets organizations have. Now it's more seen as the human assets and being able to harness them in that alignment of the vision and the purpose. But yes, to come back to your question, I think there are some basic foundational, functional things in the workplace that HR needs to control. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right at the bottom is some of that, compliance, legal type of stuff that HR, I think, still needs to obviously do. But there is that growing number of businesses that view HR beyond just that transactional to more transformational type of approach to HR. Again, if I use Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you work your way up to the top of the triangle, you've got self-actualization. So self-actualization is really about realizing the individual's full potential and therefore the organization's full potential. Now, if you're a bit of an academic nerd like myself, you can look it up. It's essentially called the resource-based view of the firm, or the resource-based view of people in the firm. People are the most important things in the company, not the machines, like in the Industrial Revolution, like I was talking about, those physical assets where people are just purely the cogs in the wheels. It is now the knowledge-based worker and the value and the potential that they bring that HR essentially is empowered or needs to be empowered to bring together, understood and harnessed. So yes, I think the traditional, the transactional view of HR still exists, but it is shifting to more of that enabling HR, strategic advisor, human behavior, harnessing that potential. And I think, like I said, I think you need both, right? So, and you can see it nowadays too, right? I think even just in titles, if I'm honest, we've gone from HR to people and culture, right? So HR is more required to be that culture custodian of competence, performance, potential, essentially.
Yeah, really interesting that change to transformational from transactional. So if we're in that strategic shift, what are some of the skills that are different for HR to be that important strategic function?
Yeah, great question. I think if I focus on, again, transactional, transformational, even in the transactional piece, which is really around HR being seen as working in the business, the policing type work with providing that solid rock foundation of policies and procedures. I think there's even some more modern skills that's required. If you think about the evolution of AI, ChatGPT, now great, right? I even see it in my team, HR using that with helping to write policies, procedures, and so forth. So I think there's definitely a evolution of skill, even in the transactional piece, for HR to be more comfortable with technology. I actually really think it's been a tough road for HR because typically HR is kind of the last function that gets a lot of technology, if I compare it to, operational functions and so forth, whereas, the likes of AI and ChatGPT has really supercharged that for HR people. So being able to use technology and data analytics, I think, is really important. Whereas with the transformational type of work for HR, it's working on the business. So working in the business, moving towards working on the business. And this is that strategic advisor. I think where HR really needs to play moving forward is the mentality around that strategic advisor, wearing a lot of what typically would be a management consultant's hat. So a management consultant providing advice on team and organization design. So what do I mean by that? Well, for me, this is really that interplay between company design and team design and company objectives and strategy. So this requires HR people to have a lot more experience and knowledge and skills around systems thinking approaches. So combining design of the organization with objectives, much more understanding of business models and approaches, things like, the balanced scorecard, Porter's five forces, root cause analysis, Six Sigma kind of stuff, as well as data and statistics that I was talking about earlier, but also understanding finances more. I often see HR teams putting goals, putting plans, putting objectives in place, somewhat in isolation, or don't feed back up to the business objectives. And I think that is where the new HR really is pushing towards, is bringing that better alignment. So beyond that strategic advisor, that management consultant, I think there's a second part, which is that people and career coach that's required, skills required in that area. So this is about understanding human behavior, being a lot more versed in psychological theories like personality, motivation, goal setting, psychological safety, you name it, almost like a corporate psychologist in many ways, knowing what makes individuals, teams, and organizations tick, and that leading and lagging indicators of performance. So understanding human behavior and how that drives organizational objectives and outcomes. So I think it's the working in the business is you're busy doing things. Working on the business is being that strategic advisor to other managers, leaders, and the exec team in the organization, essentially.
Okay, fantastic. So we're talking about becoming more transformational and strategic, working on the business. And the title of our webinar is 3 Ways People Analytics Make You a Powerful Strategic Coach. So with that background and where we're at now, what would you say is the first way that people analytics would make somebody in HR a strategic coach for their organization?
Yeah, before we dive into the first way, I think just take a bit of a step back, because I think there's essentially 3 layers in which HR needs to play to become that strategic coach. So these are essentially 3 different but interconnected layers or levels that really influence each other. And for me, this is the person, the team, the business. And when you break it down like this, it's actually less daunting to go from that transactional to that transformational approach to HR, or being that coach in many ways. So the first level, right at the middle of your diagram there, you've got there, Nathan, is the person or the individual. And really this is based on the qualities and characteristics of individuals that predicts behavior and performance. So what does that mean? Okay, so HR doesn't need to be the expert in everything technical about a role. Knowing what an accountant does, and, a software engineer or a CEO. I think a lot of the times, hiring managers or managers expect, HR leaders to know exactly what an accountant and software engineer does. No, that's your job as the manager, right? You need to tell HR. What I think and truly see the evolution of HR is in that strategic coach, in the expert in human behavior. See, performance, whether that's individual or team performance, which we'll get to, but if I think about individual performance, it's all about predicting future behavior. And of course, the best predictor of future behavior and therefore performance is past behavior and performance. So if HR can understand what motivates an individual, what motivates someone, what demotivates them, how they go about problem solving, the type of work they prefer and like to do and want to do, you can get a pretty good understanding of what the future behavior and therefore the performance of that individual is going to be within the context of work. right? So how they will interact with others, how they will enjoy the work that and the task that you've given them and the role that you've given them, irrespective of the technical know-how. So I'm not saying, technical know-how is not important, but I'm saying this understanding the human behavior sits alongside it to get the full potential of an individual. I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. So one is internal to Compono. We had an amazing software engineer, one of our early first start founding employees in many ways. Software engineer, looked at his CV and his CV said, great technical skills, have led people before, teams of 7 and so forth. When we had a discussion with him and tried to understand his motivational factors, he said to us, I've been a leader, been there, done that, been a manager, hated, never want to do it again. So we said, okay, you want to be a technical expert, so therefore we're going to essentially put you into positions where you're going to excel based on what motivates you. So it wasn't just looking at his CV and his technical skills to say, hey, yes, I can see, you can code and you've managed teams in the past. It was really understanding that human behavior piece and aligning the work and what this person did with what motivated them and their personality, essentially. And then the second piece for me, which is related to this, what comes to mind is the article that Atlassian wrote. And I believe that the title was The Brilliant Jerk. So if you've got time, you can look it up. It's a couple of years ago now. But basically it talks about, the Sheldon Coopers. If you've ever watched Big Bang Theory, Sheldon Cooper, is the person on the team that has all these amazing technical skills, the qualifications, but he really struggled to work with other people and nobody really wanted to work with him. Now, this is where I think HR comes really to the forefront, right? HR should be able to Sheldon's personality type information at hand and advise his manager that, look, he prefers to work alone. He wants to be a technical expert. He's very black and white in his thinking, and he's really analytical. So therefore, give him the analytical tasks that other people in the team might not like, that require the research, where he can work alone and focus and write his reports, and then align with the team when he needs to, right? So it's coaching leaders on the individuals in their team, but also coaching leaders on themselves, right? Around what they like to do, what they like to focus on, and also where some of their blind spots are. Now, of course, if, the team doesn't allow for you to design a work environment around individual needs, well, then, you've got to make a decision. Do we hire this type of person or don't we? Or do we manage them out of the business, right? I think these are some of the tough decisions we need to make. But this is essentially the role I see for HR. Underpinning all of this, really, I think if you follow my storyline here, is yes, humans are complex and can be unpredictable in many ways and can be different between each other. But for most part, we are all actually quite simple beings, creatures of habit that are predictable once you know how we operate and have a blueprint. So think about it as, you've got a personality report in your little back pocket, some key indicators of each of your team members. So at the individual or personal level, we are typically consistent in our behavior, and coming back to future is typically a repeat of the past. How we like to work, what motivates us, how we make decisions, how we act in difficult situations, how we behave in conflict, and how we work with each other and other people. So we have these default behaviors, and while they might be different between individuals, they're typically quite constant within ourselves, within individuals. So having insights at that individual level, knowing someone's likes, dislikes, personality is a very powerful predictor of behavior and performance and also development, right? So it's not 100% foolproof. Of course, people do vary depending on circumstances, but let me give you the example. If say someone is highly extroverted, getting them to sit in a quiet office alone 5 days a week is probably not going to work, right? So you're going to hire this person, look great on paper, great on CV, but essentially didn't quite fit what's required from that behavioral piece. The practical example of this is actually what work I did for the Transport of London. So the Transport of London at the time was experiencing some crazy turnover of train drivers. And so what they asked was, can we design a tool, an assessment to evaluate the aptitude of train drivers? And a big piece of that was essentially to evaluate someone on the introversion extroversion scale. And that's because train drivers in the tube in London typically sit in the train right at the front in a dark little spot, not talking to anybody. There's no phone reception, no internet, and they don't get to have chin wags at the water cooler. So it takes a very specific type of person. Having that kind of information and being the coach of and the advisor to leaders and teams on individuals and their behaviors, I think is actually really, really powerful. And I think that's where, in that first piece, the person or the individual, that's really where HR needs to play.
Fantastic. So if HR needs to play there, back to the title of the webinar, how's that done through people analytics? How does HR, how are they enabled to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think very simple. And I suspect most people on the webinar today already do some of this, some psychometric assessments that they already use in hiring, right? The challenge that I often see though is, or let me take a step back. If you are already using things like psychometric assessments, personality assessments, you're already 80% there. Where what normally happens is it's only used for recruitment and making the hiring decision. It doesn't get carried through to things like personalizing onboarding, creating development and learning plans inside of the organization, career plans, and also task distribution. So this is where really we should be using psychometric assessments like personality beyond just making the hiring decision. As I said, almost majority of people on this webinar would already be capturing this data. I think it's now just looking at how do we use some of this personality information beyond just hiring. And I think that's where, if you've got that blueprint, that'll be very, very useful.
Fantastic. So to recap, that's the first way that people analytics makes a strategic coach, is at the individual level, and it's based on qualities, characteristics of individuals that predict behavior and performance. So we've talked about the person, we've talked about the individual. Rudy, I think the image on the screen kind of gives away the second one, but can you dive into what's the second way that people analytics helps make us a strategic coach?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it actually builds on top of, like I said, they kind of influence one another, right? And the second level is that the team, right? So this is based on the qualities and characteristics of individual team members that are coming together, combined to predict behavior and performance of the team. Now, the reason why it goes from the individual to the team is because people don't typically work in a vacuum, right? We work in teams, we work in groups, and that means all these wonderful different personalities that are highly predictable at the individual level, but potentially different between people, now have to come together and deliver outcomes as a unit. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think about it, right? You've got all these nice little individual quirks and so forth, and all of a sudden we've got to, put our heads together and magically work. So team members will typically have different views on what type of information is important, how do we structure work, what type of work is important to do, what's information is important. Some people might be very strategic oriented, some might be very detailed oriented. Things like how do we offer help to one another, how do we critique and problem solve, all of those things are potentially actually quite different. So HR's job is more and more similar to the at the individual level, is that advising leaders and teams on how different people can come together and work together to get the results. That strategic advisor once more, but at that group level. So they really need to understand high-performing team theory and personality theory that comes together. Right? So what does that actually mean? Well, high-performing team theory, you can look at a lot of research out there, but academics have identified 8 typical types of work all high-performing teams do, right? From things like organizing workflows, to auditing the type of work, to helping each other, to being innovative, pushing the status quo, to selling what we do in terms of for resources and so forth. High-performing teams typically perform these 8 key types of work. Now, here comes the kicker. Is essentially based on our personality, the person. Based on our personalities, we actually have different preferences for performing these different types of work. So some members are more motivated by organizing and doing type of work, and some individuals might be more motivated by pushing the envelope and the status quo and innovating, right? So it's about understanding how individuals come together to make sure we deliver those 8 key types of work to be essentially that high performing team. So understanding what the team is motivated by, what they're not motivated by, and what we're likely to be focusing on to get better at versus to avoid doing as a team. And also what this really can help you with is understanding where there's likely to be things like conflict in a team. So if one person's the auditor, right, we audit our type of work, and another person in the team is, let's say, the innovator, well, they're not necessarily going to see eye to eye in terms of how work should be done. So you can almost predict certain levels of conflict based on individual personalities and work preferences. Of course, not all conflict is bad, right? So what this can also help with is different types of constructive type of conflict, right? So creating that variability around these 8 key types of work might mean there's conflict, but if managed right, can actually lead to a lot of different ideas, innovation, and across the team for different opinions and different views. And this is where you can really, it might take a bit longer, Nathan, to come up with these ideas, but this is where diversity of thought really comes to mind. The other thing that focusing on the team can really do if HR can get their head around this high performing and personality is to also understand things like groupthink, right? If all my team members are doers, well, we're going to be really good at doing things, but it might not necessarily be the right things. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a second. And then there's also, well, a HR being that strategic advisor to the team and the leader in terms of what preferences does the leader have that might actually influence the team, what they focus on versus, right? If you're a leader that's really focused on doing and organizing, well, you might not necessarily focus on the opposite side, which is that innovation and helping and so forth. So HR really needs to provide that advice on how to fill the gaps, how to manage those essential 8 key types of work of high-performing teams, what systems, what mechanisms are needed to provide coverage, not just in terms of, what people are motivated by. So it becomes that essentially that high-performing coach. I'm going to give you an example of this. So there's a mine here in Queensland that we did a bit of work for, and it was for their safety department. And it was really interesting because where the work all started was, and if you've listened to previous webinars I've done, I've given this example before, but I really love this example because I think it nails it. So this safety department said, look, we've got a really bad reputation in the business and we can't figure out why. We keep doing all the work, we keep writing all the policies, the procedures and so forth, but it seems that our key stakeholders just aren't happy. When we looked at the individual personalities and how they actually mapped onto this work wheel, what we found was everybody in the team were doers. So what they were doing were sitting behind their computers and punching out a lot of work, writing a lot of policies, writing a lot of procedures. But what they didn't do and didn't feel comfortable with is the key word here. They didn't go out to the rest of the organization, the operational teams, to actually understand how should policies be written, how should procedures, safety procedures be designed, and so forth. So they were designing things, but it just wasn't fit for purpose. What they were able to do post that was to say, okay, well, everybody are doers, fine. Right? We're not going to fire everybody and we're not going to hire new people to provide coverage, but we needed to put mechanisms in place to actually ensure that we get away from the computer, that we actually spend some time and effort in terms of getting to know our stakeholders, what their needs are and so forth. So they really needed to, I guess, design the workflows and the tasks within the team to provide that better coverage. And this is where HR really becomes important because you don't need to pay a management consultant a ton of money to come and do this. This is where HR, if they've got that knowledge of high-performing teams, of personality, can actually be that strategic advisor inside of organizations as well. So, so focusing on that individual, moving on to the team, that's the second level there.
Fantastic. So it's based on the quality and characteristics of the team members and that are together combined in predicting that behavior and performance. And I think that example we just gave is a really clear illustration. It's really easy to grab onto that. So Rudy, can you take us into the third way that people analytics will help HR become a strategic coach?
Yeah, so again, this is that next, or the outer layer there, which is the company or the organization level. And this is very much based on the characteristics of the workplace that individuals and teams need to operate in. Think of it as the personality, if you will, of the organization itself, right? So when I talk about the personality or the design of the workplace, what I'm really talking about here is the culture that needs to be embedded or enabled in teams to enable performance and individual performance as well, to get the outcomes that the organization need, right? It's about the design of the business to achieve the objectives. So when people hear the word culture, I know some of your eyes probably glazed over and probably rocking back and forth. But look, I think culture doesn't need to be some obscure, polluted construct. I personally think culture is actually quite simple, and there's a very simple definition for it, and I think it's actually quite valuable, which is the way we do things around here to achieve our objectives. Now, normally people just say it's the way we do things. We've added the second part, which is around achieving objectives. So it's the way we do things around it to achieve our objectives. See, every organization has a very specific way, an accepted way of doing things to achieve its goals. For example, a company might have whatever the goal is, but the way their design is, we might have many formal processes or procedures to facilitate decision-making. We might have a hierarchical structure with clear division of responsibilities. We might be more risk-averse than risk-taking to achieve our objectives. We might be more future-focused with clear plans than reactive to customer needs. Right? Every organization has its own way of doing things. And culture is the design of that work environment, the systems, the processes, the structures, the practices, the procedures that helps or hinder goal attainment, right? So the key for HR is being able to understand, is our current culture going to deliver the desired outcomes that we want? Or put it another way, is our current and desired culture aligned with our corporate strategic objectives? So I'm yet to find a company that at the end of the financial year doesn't do some sort of end of financial year planning with some fiscal goals, right? Everybody does it. Every organization says, I want to achieve, X amount of dollars in FY25. Perfect timing because it's first month of the new financial year. However, what we've really noticed is that they don't often look at how the organization is designed to facilitate that. Is our organization designed the right way to actually achieve those objectives, right? Or will we fall halfway, flat on our face? So achieving revenue goals or achieving objectives is a lagging indicator, right? When it's done, it's done. You can't change anything about it. But organization design, organizational culture is a leading indicator that will tell you if your business is heading in the right way or not, and what you need to change. I think what makes it, or where culture has become some nebulous, confusing construct is, well, what do we focus? Well, there's essentially key cultural dimensions, and we can, if our webinar participants want to find out what that is, we can have a discussion around that a bit later. But there are some key fundamental dimensions of culture that HR people should be able to evaluate what we've got now, what we need, or what is our desired culture to achieve those organizations' objectives. So, for example, in order for a company to achieve its revenue growth of 20% year on year, you've got to ask yourself the question, do we need more or less formal systems? Do we need to focus more on customer needs than operational effectiveness? Do we need more task focus and less people focused orientation? Do we need to be a flatter, a more agile organization? Or do we need to be more hierarchical? Do we allow for employees to be questioning management? Or do we just want staff to do as they're told? Do we need to be more innovative? Or do we need to be more risk averse? So I'm already giving you some key dimensions of culture that organizations need to be able to answer, facilitated through HR, because let's face it, HR is the custodian of culture in many ways. So therefore, HR really needs to be that cultural experts in organization design, that strategic advisor to, I'm going to call it the bean counters, right? The transformational expert to the transactional needs of the business. So supporting the leadership team on how to embed that design, how to embed that culture. Once we're clear on culture and we know how to embed or evolve what we currently have to achieve our objectives, this can really then focus our energy on where we should be focusing our change and strategic transformation in line with that business goals. And for me, this is where that 3 layers between the person or the individual, the team, and the organization really comes full circle for me, because understanding your culture, understanding the culture that you have, the culture that you need will influence the people that you need to bring into the business, the type of individuals you need to develop them, and how you need to engage your teams. How do you need to build your teams? And then this in turn will influence the way teams naturally operate, which in turn influences the culture that you need. So if you can understand the individual, how that looks like when they come together, is that aligned with the culture that you want to design and create? How do we need to essentially strategically build that business to provide that alignment between individual, team, and organizational culture? So to me, these are all really simple concepts, and I don't think you need to overcomplicate it, but with a few basic understanding of the person, the team, and the company, I think this is where we can become real strategic coaches for HR.
Fantastic. So just to recap, that third one is the organization, the team, and the company level. It's based on characteristics of the workplace and design personality of the workplace and the individuals and teams that they need to operate in. So just going to recap just quickly before we talk about the free tool coming up in just a moment. So we've got the 3 layers, or the 3 ways that people analytics will help make you a strategic coach. First being at the personal or the individual level, based on qualities and characteristics of the individual that predict behavior and performance. And then taking that to the team level, the second way is based on the qualities and characteristics of team members combined that predict behavior and performance for the team. And the third way that Rudy's just taken us through is for the organization, based on characteristics of the workplace that the individuals and teams need to operate in. Cool. So how can we get started with this? What can we put into place today? Well, we have, for everyone in the session, is access to a free introductory tool, a free work personality assessment. And I'm just going to roll a little screenshot while I'm talking. So this work personality assessment is free and available. You can take this assessment to discover your dominant work type based on your personality. It's a quick tool, takes under 2 minutes, and it's really digging into that first layer, the individual first, focusing on self, looking at what your work personality is. So you can get an early indication to discover what your work personality is. And you can also share this with team members and collectively start to build a picture of your team. Now, this is just a full taste of what can be achieved in our full People Analytics platform. And our team would love to have a chat with you if you would like to explore this a bit further.
Just so that you know, this is a bit of fun, right? It's not the full-blown psychometrically validated tool, right? So we really stand behind the science and data of our assessments and our tools. So this is a bit of fun that you can very, very quickly get a bit of a taste around what type of work you prefer, what's your blind spots. And then, as Nathan said, you can actually use it for your team members as well and plot them on that work wheel. But then if you want the actual full-blown psychometrically validated assessment, which isn't complex to complete, we can actually have a discussion with you beyond that, and also how that then ties back into the team and the organization's culture as well. So this is just a bit of fun for you to see or have a taste of what we do.
So the QR code is still showing at the moment. You can scan that now, jump on straight away, and we'll also send a direct link along with the recording as soon as that is processed, edited, and ready to go. So, Rudy, before we conclude, we've had 3 ways that HR can be a strategic coach using people analytics. Any final thoughts or comments before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think probably 2. I think there's probably a lot of people wondering, okay, am I in the right organization? Am I in the right job at the moment? If we're talking about that transactional versus transformational, I think that's not a question, I can answer, but hopefully this session has piqued your interest and also made you question as to, well, if you really want to be that transformational HR person, is your organization actually supporting you, or do they still just basically expect you to be the police And then, or vice versa, right? If you just want to be the police, is the organization expecting you to be that transformational? So I think there's probably a little bit of soul searching that people need to have a bit of a think about. And I think coming back to that transformational piece, I don't think it needs to be complicated, right? We don't need to overcomplicate it. We don't need to make personality, team design, and culture to be these nebulous topics. I think it actually is quite simple once you understand how they actually influence one another, and the three layers we need to work on. I think once you're able to focus on those three layers individually with the transactional work that underpins, as I said, it's always going to be there for HR, but I don't think it needs to be overcomplicated.
Fantastic. Well, Rudy, thank you for your time. I always enjoy hearing your stories and your background. There's so many layers and so much to learn from. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you to learn about 3 ways people analytics can help you become a strategic coach within your organization. We look forward to seeing how you use the work personality assessment, and we will see you again on a future webinar or when you have a chat to one of our teams. Bye for now.
See you guys.